Hello and welcome to everyone who's joining. Love to see we have 42 in the room right now. So hello and welcome. So today we'll be talking about CBD. I think this is quite overdue as it is quite quite a talking point. As at least one of our panelists will describe, it is hard to walk down a high street without seeing someone selling CBD. I think many people may begin to understand sort of what it is and what it does, but I think a lot of people do really want to know a lot about the law, about how it works, about benefits, about harms and risks, and about what we should be doing with CBD. So I'm hoping we get to cover all of those things today. So we have our expert guests, Harry, Amir, and Joe. I think so. If we might start with Harry, so if you can, Harry, please introduce yourself, and we'll move on through to Amir and to Joe.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that, James. So yeah, I'm Harry Sumnall. I'm a professor in substance use at Liverpool John Moores University School of Psychology and the Public Health Institute. Now, I have very diverse research interests ranging from lab studies right to drug policy analysis. And I've been involved in policy guidance and advice for many years. And one of the things I am very much interested in is public understanding of drugs issues and drugs policy issues for various different reasons, whether that be psychedelics, whether that be drug laws, but CBD as well. First of all, today we're talking about CBD, cannabidiol, which is one of the major cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. And as I'll talk about in a moment, it has medicinal uses and well-being uses. Okay, so an overview with regards to laws and policies. So CBD is not under international control. So it's not under the United Nations single conventions, which controls all of the drugs like cocaine or ecstasy. It's not considered to have any abuse in inverted commas or potential to produce dependence. And there's been a number of safety reviews by the World Health Organizations, which suggest that it's a relatively safe compound. Now, there are some international variations. So in some countries do have some quite strict laws about the possession of CBD. But in the United Kingdom, it's not a controlled drug under the Misuse of Drugs Act. So just looking at UK drugs legislation, as I mentioned before, it's not controlled under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, which is the ABC classification system. And in the UK, we also have the Psychoactive Substances Act. Now, this is designed to control compounds which are not included in the Misuse of Drugs Act, but, and the definition here is capable of producing a psychoactive effect in a person who consumes it and is not an exempted substance. So we get slightly complicated there. So exempted substances include things like caffeine products, nicotine, alcohol, but also approved foodstuffs, which I'll move on to in a moment. Now, there are interesting discussions I've been involved in. It's classically CBD is not considered a psychoactive product, although some pharmacologists would argue that it is. But if we think about its uses in anxiety, sleep, relaxation, mood, etc., that suggests to me that it has psychoactive functions. And if we look at some high-profile legal cases over the last few years, looking at other drugs which are not considered psychoactive, such as alkyl nitrites, poppers, a drug not being pharmacologically psychoactive is not a defense under law. So if a drug is perceived to change behavior, mood, etc., under law, it could be considered psychoactive. Looking at the popular uses of CBD, so as James mentioned in his introduction, you can't walk down a high street, go to Sainsbury's or Tesco without seeing these products. And there's almost a breathless and mostly uncritical reporting of CBD products. It's described as a wonder drug. But manufacturers and retailers of these consumer products have to be very careful about not to make those claims, because they even suggest things in their advertising that CBD might be used to cure, restore function, prevent something, avoid a disorder. Then this falls under medicines regulations, and that is strictly regulated in the United Kingdom. So it's a real grey area. So you have a consumer base who are presumably taking CBD products because they feel it's producing medical benefits, but you have an industry that can't talk about this. I mentioned exemption from the Psychoactive Substances Act before. So where a CBD product is designed to be consumed or ingested, it's therefore classed as what we call a novel food and regulated by the Food Standards Agency. Now, the Food Standards Agency is interested in product safety, labeling, and to a certain degree, advertising, not about efficacy. So the products that you see on the high streets, they've been approved and reviewed for an evidence of safety, but not necessarily for the efficacy, i.e. what consumers think the effects will be, whether it's effective in doing that. And that final point, just in terms of the regulatory landscape, I think this might be of concern for those attendees working in drug services, and this is around CBD vapes. Technically, if you consume a vaping product, you're ingesting it. So technically, it should fall under the Food Standards Agency regulations and novel foods, but largely it doesn't. And it's relatively easy to buy these products online. One of the concerns we have about vapes and cannabinoid vapes in general is about product content and product quality. But an analysis done by Wedenos in Wales, for example. Now, Wedenos is a public service which analyzes drugs. You can send off a sample and they'll publish the contents, findings on the contents on their websites a couple of weeks later. So they've analyzed a range of CBD vapes. Now, my quick and dirty analysis of their findings suggests that most of the submitted products do contain CBD, but a not insignificant number of products also contain controlled cannabinoids. That includes THC and other THC-style cannabinoids, but also synthetic cannabinoids as well.
Noted, thank you very, very much. We might now move to Amir. So, Amir, if you could introduce yourself and your research and your main agendas.
Thanks, James, and thanks everyone for attending. So yeah, my name's Amir England. I've been working in this field for about 14 years, and I call myself a cannabinoid psychopharmacologist. So that just means that I've done most of my research in humans, giving humans cannabinoids. My interest is around sort of the effects on humans in relation to psychiatry and addiction. So that's sort of my background. So the studies I've conducted have been to look at the relative harms of cannabis products with or without CBD. Now, bringing back to a bit of CBD pharmacology, we would call it a psychoactive compound, but importantly, it's a non-intoxicating compound. So it does not produce any intoxicating effects. If you get an intoxicating effect, it's most likely from other cannabinoids in the plant. In terms of CBD safety, it's quite difficult to judge because we're still learning a lot about CBD, its pharmacology, and its effects. But generally, we'd say it's a well-tolerated drug for most people, apart from in patients who have also epilepsy. In that population, there was an increased risk of pneumonia. So what we have seen is that CBD does block some of the enzymes in the liver that help you metabolize or break down medications. So if you're taking CBD alongside other medications, there might be a risk that medication's not fully broken down yet, and you might experience side effects. Now, Harry also mentioned that CBD is an approved medicine, specifically for rare childhood epilepsy. And we hear a lot in, news media stories that patients become completely seizure-free. And that is actually true. However, the rate of patients being seizure-free was about 5% in the trials. But obviously, when you get news stories about CBD, those are the ones that you'll hear about. Some other sort of effects of CBD that we know of are from other psychiatric conditions, specifically schizophrenia and other psychotic illnesses. Now, there have been 3 clinical trials where CBD has been trialed, and one CBD was compared to a regular antipsychotic medication. So as a patient, you were randomly assigned either cannabidiol or an antipsychotic. And the study showed that they both were equally effective in treating psychotic symptoms, but the CBD had much fewer side effects. Now, the problem here is that there is no placebo group in that study. So we don't know if the antipsychotic and CBD would do better than placebo. Now, the clinical trial that I was involved with, the schizophrenia, 88 patients were randomly assigned either 1,000 milligrams of CBD a day for 6 weeks or placebo. And in that study, CBD was effective to treating what we call the positive psychotic symptoms. So they would be hearing voices, like hallucinations, delusions, paranoia. And the third clinical trial of schizophrenia actually found that CBD was not effective when given to patients who have treatment-resistant schizophrenia. So these are patients who have trialed several courses of various different antipsychotic medication and have not achieved remission. So the jury's still out in psychosis. Another area is actually cannabis addiction. So there's one study that was done at UCL that found that patients who received CBD alongside a psychological intervention used less cannabis during the month they took part in the trial. And lastly, I talk a bit about what I personally have done. So looking at the acute harms of smoking cannabis with and without CBD. Now, there was some earlier research suggesting that CBD could protect you against sort of paranoia and memory impairing effects of smoked cannabis. However, what we did was that we gave healthy volunteers cannabis on 4 different occasions. Every time they got the same amount of THC, and in 3 of the 4 sessions, they also got CBD. We previously thought that the more CBD you had, the better off you would be. However, there was no difference in any of the outcomes that we looked at. The only thing that we did see was that the more CBD there was in the cannabis preparation, the more our participants coughed. So it does seem like, as a compound, CBD might be a bit of an irritant to your airways. And yeah, I think I can speak about a lot of other research areas, but generally there's very little evidence. And when I say evidence, I very much want to stress placebo-controlled studies. Now, the reason for this is that placebo has a huge impact, especially on sort of mental health psychiatric conditions. There have been many studies to show positive effects of CBD, but normally those studies are not double-blind and they're not comparing it to placebo.
Good. So many thanks for that. And now let's move on to Joe. So Joe, thank you very, very much for joining. And as Harry and Amir have already done, please do introduce yourself and your research, key agendas, etc.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and thanks, James. So interestingly, following on from Amir there, I look at things from a more criminological and sociological perspective. So I'm a researcher at Lancaster University Law School, and I want to effectively find out about the cultural significance of CBD. So really finding out about why people take CBD, where they take it, how they consume it, how they find out about the substance in itself. So my study really is looking at the Northwest more specifically and the Midlands. We're doing observations of stores, of CBD consumers, owners and employees, and trying to find out from the people who are actually taking the substance why they're taking it. We know that CBD has kind of exploded onto the scene, but why has it come about? Why is this different to any other type of drug that might be out there? And the different nuances with it. And we do know that, of course, it has the connection with cannabis because it is a cannabinoid, but do people actually see that when they're taking it or when they make the decision to consume CBD? Often when you go into these stores, it can be quite difficult to actually see whether it is a CBD product or not. So I look at the marketing of these products. Some will be quite clear. You'll see a cannabis leaf or different associations that give you that ultimate image that is linked to cannabis. Others, there won't be at all. So that's one of the things I'm also looking at to see when consumers pick out these products, what are they looking for with it? So I come from a sort of alternative medicine background and a drug culture background. So I'm looking at it from both perspectives. And when we're trying to form what effectively is CBD culture, we're trying to see what sort of background is that person coming from and where are they going? Are they taking it as an alternative medicine because they might be unhappy with things that are happening in terms of their own treatment? I found in my own research that it can be from anxiety to depression to inflammatory bowel disease. People often won't find the answers in a normal clinical setting, so they turn to alternative medicines. And for a lot of them, CBD is the best alternative medicine for them to alleviate the issues that they find. So that might be pain relief generally is what we see as the highest reason, but there's also another host of reasons as well. I find it quite interesting in terms of positionality that you need to be careful of where you come from. So I am also a CBD user, so I do have some understanding of the industry from my own perspective. I have inflammatory bowel disease. It is an incurable disease currently. So I always looked for an alternative therapy from my own perspective as a child. Since like CBD has kind of exploded onto the scene, there's been multiple grey areas in terms of the market itself. Mislabeling has been quite a widespread issue within the sector, and it's something that the industry is constantly trying to update and get better at. But that is still something that needs to be worked on. In some respects, there's a more laissez-faire attitude from the government when it comes to CBD regulation. I find it interesting that we call this street discussions. I agree with Harry in some respects. I think this is more, CBD's become a bit more of a high street discussion. But what I've seen from my research is the CBD products that are available are completely different depending on the type of store that you want to go to. And those different stores will, of course, get different types of consumers going to them. Generally, we're finding that more than a third of people are buying their CBD online, and that's helping with multiple blogs and authors in this industry trying to give you advice on that. But as Harry spoke about earlier, it's very difficult because they can't make these medicinal claims about it. They can kind of skirt around the issue, which isn't really helping consumers and isn't helping people in this industry that's trying to convey what CBD is, because we're constrained in terms of what we can say. So I would say, from my perspective, I look really just at why people take it, how they take it, why they're interested in it, and it's given me so much rich data. So if anyone has anything they want to do about that, I still have a survey open, so I'll plug my survey. So if anyone wants to talk to me about CBD, their experiences and anything like that, feel free to message me afterwards.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much, Joe. So very, very, very interesting points made by all three. Just a really, really quick question from me before I then look to the audience Q&A. I think Joe or Harry or maybe even Amir too might have an answer to this. So a clear major issue and tension is the fact that they suggest there are health benefits, but they're not allowed to say there are health benefits. What's the legal situation when Paul Merson or Matt Letizia strongly indicate there are health benefits? Do influencers such as them need to be mindful of the law, or is there a bit of a carte blanche for a person on the internet to say my health has been sorted out by taking this CBD product? Can anyone give me an answer to that?
I'll give a very quick response. I'm sure Joe's got something to say around this. As long as it's not the company themselves making that claim in their product, website, and retail information, that's fine. An influencer who is giving an independent opinion, a paid independent opinion, can pretty much say what they want within reason. And this is also why most of the online retailers very prominently have Trustpilot bars because this is a way to move those claims onto the consumer, and therefore there's a distance. To answer your question, James, Matt Letitia can say anything he wants to, and he usually does, usually about conspiracy theories. But as long as there's that distance, the companies are going to be okay. Joe, I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts on this.
It's the same, really. I think in some respects, it's actually helped some CBD companies because it's allowed them to do bottom-up marketing and allow the consumers to actually say, no, this is good. We can tell you for sure we've taken the product. But the companies themselves are very limited in terms of what they can say. And then we'll have issues with licenses if they go too far into saying this is a medicinal product because it has medicinal benefits, because then they would be basically saying, okay, this is a medicine, not a food product, as it's currently stated.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later on, but in a way, a very indirect way, it does remind me of medicinal cannabis and psychedelics in therapy as well, where a lot of the claims and a lot of the uses has been driven by what we might call folk uses rather than more legitimate medicinal uses. So I think there's some overlaps there as well.
Yeah, it seems quite incredible loophole, I guess, the whole influencer thing, and really, really interesting the fact this industry has grown from bottom up, as you say. I'll start doing the Q&A now. I'll start with one for Amir. Has there been any studies with CBD and under 18s?
Yes, because the big clinical trials in epilepsy were mainly in pediatric epilepsy. So a lot of those patients were sort of under the age of 10. So there has been quite extensive studies. There's also been a study that I was involved with but that was in cannabis users that were under the age of 18, and they received THC with or without CBD in controlled settings, and to specifically look at sort of cognition, if their cognition got worse or if it was protected by CBD. And as the study we performed at King's with the different ratios, CBD didn't offer any benefit to the 16-year-olds in that study.
Less of a concern if it's managing to control the epilepsy.
Thank you very, very much for both of your answers there. And one quick follow-up for Amir is, so you mentioned we've both discussed all the research on pediatric epilepsy. When the person in the Q&A asked about under 18, kind of my mind went straight to adolescents. Amir, has there any of the studies you've looked at included people from the 18 age group?
Not in terms of sort of long-term usage of CBD. And to mention, I mean, some of the concerns around CBD would be that we don't know what the long-term impact of chronic use is. So that, if even small amounts of CBD, say, impact your liver negatively, prevents your liver from functioning correctly. Now, a few of the children in the Epidiolex, the epilepsy studies, had to withdraw from the study because of elevated levels of liver biomarkers. So there is potential risk, but there's uncertainty in this area.
Do we know much about how much teenagers are getting hold of CBD? I presume that you need to be 18 to buy it from a shop. Although I now have a huge self-doubt, I don't actually know that. So I'm wondering, is there a culture of teenagers trying to source CBD? And I guess how effective do we know if regulation is about keeping teenagers from buying CBD preparations? Jay, do you have anything on that?
So as part of my studies, I've gone into over 80 stores selling CBD. None of them have actually had any age limit on the sales for their CBD. So you could be any age to buy it, apart from vapes. So actually it was vapes where in those stores, they limited it that if you had to be 18 or over.
So got some more questions now, which I think might be more on the Joe and Harry territory, and I've got some more after that, which are more on the Amir territory. So I'm going to ask some now which really ask about the relation between CBD culture and THC culture. So we've had Andy Gomersall saying, from a drug expert view from within the police, is there any correlation in research around THC users and CBD, if any? When cannabis users tell me they mix CBD dry herb into their joints as a harm reduction strategy, is there evidence backing it, apart from the fact they don't use tobacco or more THC herb? So yeah, those two about how much are CBD users, you think, an extension related to an extension of illicit cannabis users? Yeah, and do you hear of this harm reduction modality of people mixing CBD in with their THC when smoking it in joints?
Yeah, so this is one of the things I am exploring in my project, and we have seen that there is a correlation between what we would class as cannabis culture and CBD culture, where you will get people who will consume both substances, and some that is a pure belief that actually CBD is just another extension of cannabis culture, and it's a good way of highlighting the benefits of cannabis, especially the medicinal benefits. So you'll find in a lot of stores that do sell CBD, they'll also sell pro-cannabis literature things and other stuff that can help you consume cannabis. So there is that clear link, but there's also the landscape for medicinal cannabis is quite complicated in the UK. And we actually found that quite a lot of people who take medicinal cannabis will also take CBD to help alleviate a lot of those issues. But there's also an issue in terms of access and funds to actually get medicinal cannabis. And that will drive some people to either taking pure CBD, or for some people to actually go and having to buy it off the illegal market and do it that way, purely on financial things. But then there's also some people who do just take both because they see a linkage between the two and believe that actually CBD is one of the best ways to get full legalization of cannabis, both medicinally and recreationally.
If we consider that in the UK, about 35% of adults will have used cannabis in their lifetime, but then there is going to be an overlap, of course there is. But one thing I've noticed is that perhaps some more of the bigger retailers and some of the bigger brands are very careful to distance their products from cannabis culture, if I could call it that. So they won't use the classic imagery or colors of cannabis. So there won't be any leaves there. They'll avoid green. It'll be like pastels, blues, peach colors, things like that. I think that as we've seen that increasingly as it's become more of a mainstream and legitimate product, and it's moved from perhaps some cannabis culture shops, if we can call it that, into the high street supermarket. I think this is a way that it's been used to expand it to other segments of the population who wouldn't even go near cannabis anyway. And you mentioned the harm reduction component as well. I suppose it's a similar discussion to what's happening with alcohol with the no and low drinks. If you can replace some THC episodes with CBD episodes, then potentially it could do. But one of the concerns with no and low alcohol is that it's actually added to the intake of alcohol anyway, rather than replacing it. It's not a substitute, it's a complement. So there's that. And of course, one of the biggest harms associated with consumption of cannabis through joints is combustion and mixing it with tobacco. So I would argue that maybe Amir will be able to tell us more about this, that it may or may not have protective value for mental health, but in terms of other health outcomes, I'm not so sure it's an effective strategy.
Noted, thank you. Very quickly before I move to Amir, I think really interesting point about how the major brands have tried to distance themselves from cannabis culture. As someone who's taught criminology in the context of substance use, I've talked a lot about normalization theory and the idea that cannabis is a very, very, very normalized drug. And interesting, the limit to it, or perhaps that in one way the normalization of cannabis has manifested in consumer products which reference cannabis use because people who buy them want to feel a very little bit deviant. Amir, so have you got anything on this harm reduction idea?
Well, firstly, to mention and sort of reiterate what Harry said about tobacco. Tobacco is one of the most addictive compounds we know of, and one of the most harmful one. And studies have shown that people who co-use cannabis and tobacco have a higher likelihood of later developing problems with cannabis, so becoming addicted to cannabis. So avoiding tobacco is definitely a good idea. However, adding CBD cannabis to your joint, if it's just additive to the THC that's in there, it's very unlikely that that would actually negate any of the negative effects of THC, because that's essentially what we and other researchers have done. We've controlled the amount of THC. So you get the same amount of THC in different experiments. The only difference is that you have more CBD on top of it, and it did not help. But if you were to go for a higher CBD ratio cannabis, where the cannabis itself has a greater ratio of CBD, there is a bit less likely that you'll experience harm, because cannabis produces both CBD and THC from the same precursor material in the plant. So instead of going for 20% THC, you might go for 15% CBD with a 5% THC. What you are doing is just reducing your intake of THC, which is a good thing. And the only way at the moment we know of reducing harms is to reduce your THC intake.
Noted. Thank you very, very much. I actually had a couple of interesting comments from Barvia in the chat. I turned to CBD as I didn't meet the NHS criteria according to my neurologist to be prescribed Sativex for MS. For multiple sclerosis, what I've found so far is that CBD is effective in helping decrease MS symptoms. And over the past 2 years, my MRI scans have not found any new brain lesions. So it's an interesting one of people who cannot get medical THC moving to high street CBD, it seems. And I've got another question from Hannah. And hi, Hannah, who I know is logged in about less than a mile away from where I am sitting. Have there been many studies, trials showing the efficacy of CBD on its own as a pain relief, as opposed to medical cannabis? So, Amir, do you have anything on that?
So in general, there's a bit of a debate regarding cannabis and efficacy for various pain conditions, where a lot of studies show no difference to placebo, while some studies show a slight improvement in pain conditions with cannabis over placebo. So the added benefit seems to be relatively small when you put all the studies together. But that's not to say that for individual patients it might make a large difference. But CBD specifically has been looked at in a few placebo-controlled trials. And when you do placebo-control the study, you normally see that CBD has no additional pain-relieving beneficial effects, sadly. But when you do sort of uncontrolled studies where people take CBD, invariably the results will be positive. So what that tells me is that likely we'll get a big placebo response. And that's actually quite interesting from a different point of view, in that there was a research team in Stockholm, Sweden, who looked at media reports around medicinal cannabis and related that to the placebo response in clinical trials. Now, what they found is that the increased hype that we get in society from media and social media actually relates to an enhanced placebo effect, so that people who sign up to the trials have an extra high expectation that it's going to work. So even if they're in the placebo group, they have a strong response, which could even sort of mask the potential positive effects of cannabis.
I don't know if anyone else has anything on CBD and pain relief before I move to our next questions.
I'm reminded that there was a really nice review on low dose CBD, a bit closer to some of the consumer doses that we see. And even with those, controlling for the quality of the trials, again, no real benefits. And this raises really interesting questions about the evidence of about the concept of evidence-based medicine and the placebo effect, exactly as Amir is talking about, because we're talking about a £690 million market. Now, I think CBD is overall a product which showed so much benefit but delivered so little in clinical studies. But that's a very scientific view of this. There must be something happening with consumers around their beliefs, around their expectations, and the pain relief that they got to mean that they keep on buying these products. And perhaps Joe can tell us more about this. People are gaining individual benefits. And this is almost in complete contrast from all the clinical studies are telling us. I mentioned in my opening remarks about how sometimes we can maybe even see parallels with some of the medicinal cannabis literature as well, where some of the benefits seen in naturalistic studies have not been seen in some of the full-blown, carefully controlled, placebo-controlled, randomized controlled trials. I'm somebody who has a really open mind towards CBD, but without this research and evidence, it's like, well, what does the future hold? Is CBD just going to be another miracle wrinkle cream?
Yeah, and I think from an industry perspective, talking to people within the industry, I think they would probably say, we are quite interested in this. If you look at our websites, there's lots of lab results. We can see that there are benefits to it, but they would argue that they're being constrained in terms of what they can say. And there's a concern within the industry as well that quite overnight this could be taken away from them. If a different government comes in and decides, okay, no, we don't want this anymore, they could quite easily get rid of it. And that actually they see the emphasis being on government and legislators to provide a better legal framework for them so that they can do a long-term investment. But James spoke about earlier about normalization. I would say CBD has kind of normalized itself within the health and well-being culture. And it's those people who are generally buying CBD. So a lot of these people already signed up to the beliefs in alternative medicine and giving things a try and seeing if they can do anything to relieve themselves of the pain, because that's a big thing for them. A lot of people who are taking CBD will be taking protein powder, vitamins, and other supplements as well. So I'd say a lot of consumers really are giving it a try because they feel as though the clinical side of medicine has let them down, and CBD is an alternative for them to try. But I think the next couple of years will be quite interesting to see where we go, whether these companies will get more investment and will update their results, and if they do work with people like Amir on this, or whether they just continue to keep on trying to market it as a good alternative therapy without a large-scale results to basically back it up.
I get what you're saying, Joe, and I agree with most of it. Some great points there. But I suppose my point is that current legislation doesn't prevent some of the larger CBD companies actually providing grants to researchers to do this, because it's not making claims about their product to the consumer. It's funding research into particular doses, particular conditions. Yeah, again, try not to be too cynical, but I think the legislation at the moment, policy at the moment, supports comfort for the industry that they can go on selling products as food supplements to make the claims, and it will be highly profitable, continue to be highly profitable, and they don't need to invest money into the research. If we see more traditional food supplements, vitamin pills, which are primarily marketed to healthy people who have balanced diets, I can kind of see that this is where the industry is going to be focusing on. And really good point, the interesting point, Joe, that you mentioned about how you think that the primary target audience for CBD products are people interested in other issues of health and well-being. But the proportion of the population that consumer surveys tell us that have tried CBD products and the range of products that are available and the outlets of products available, I think it's also tapping into a different type of market as well. It has an additional power, an additional attraction to those traditional goods.
Quick follow-up for myself. I think it's really, really interesting thoughts there, and especially one that caught my mind was, I forget which of Harry or Joe said this about, I think it was actually Harry, we've got lots of clinical trials about what the drug CBD does, but far less on it from the consumer side. And it's an interesting issue to say that perhaps we might find that the health benefits in a clinical setting are unclear and therefore it never becomes medicine. But from a consumer perspective, perhaps we can highly value the placebo effect that CBD gives some people. If people are buying it to sleep and they are getting to sleep, cool. As long as Amir's studies find it's not really, really harming people. I mean, yeah, a placebo can be a great, great thing if it solves your insomnia. Unless anyone's got a follow-up from that, I've got a couple of questions actually relating to potential harms. We've got three questions which are all kind of similarly pointing. David says, we are currently not allowed to use CBD on offshore platforms, mainly oil rigs, I guess he means, for a litany of reasons. However, if I did, there is a risk that long-term use could cause a positive result for cannabinoids on a workplace drug and alcohol test. So that's one question. Apart that in your mind's like, is it feasible? A bit like the old, how many poppy seed bagels do you need to get to taste positive for opiates? Is it possible to lose your job and test positive for cannabis because of consuming CBD? Sarah, EWER. I don't know if that's an acronym for where you work or your surname. Sarah Ewer, I will say anyway. I work in the safety critical aviation industry, and the most frequent question we get is about CBD product and safety to work. We have a policy that advises that employees should avoid consuming products because of the risks around lack of regulation across the industry. Is safe, appropriate, more nuanced advice possible? And then Emma, again, another similar one. Emma Robinson says, what effect are CBD oils considered to have on cognition compared to THC, for example? Impact on individuals undertaking safety critical roles. Amir, do you want to have a bite of that? And I'm just going to put what I want to travel to afterwards, as well as Anne. And this might be one for Joe or Harry more than Amir, I'm not sure. Its follow-up was, what proportion of supposed CBD has THC in it, which will obviously have implications for the questions I've posed there?
Well, there have been controlled studies where participants are given cannabis with or without CBD to look at performance, driving performance. And basically, what they found was that the addition of CBD did not impact the results. And there have been small studies looking at driving performance on CBD alone. And so far, there's nothing to suggest that CBD has an impact. So, but that brings us into the issue of contamination. So the consumer products, I think about 1/3 actually contain what it says on the bottle. So far, and also the cognitive effects. So our team have done controlled experiments, and there's no difference to placebo. So we've not been able to spot any in very controlled studies. The risk of positive tests, now that is a potential. So if a product has small amounts of THC and the person takes those supplements over long periods of time, there can be an accumulation. And some tests are quite sensitive, and they don't always look at THC itself. So it usually looks at a metabolite of THC called carboxy-THC that is non-intoxicating but lasts in urine for much longer. So there is a possibility that you can test positive, although proper controlled studies have not looked at this, I would say.
Yes, so I appreciate the concerns of colleagues in safety critical industries, but I think the simple answer is there's been no specific research which will directly answer that question. and the fact that there is variability in the market, which might mean that people are consuming a controlled substance. Now, that is a different question from whether that will affect their performance, but simply from a perspective of detection of a controlled substance, then it does seem to be sensible advice. So I think if employees are buying products from, a well-regulated product from a mainstream retailer, that is less likely to happen. But if they're buying it from their local shop, maybe online as well, then that is a concern there.
Noted, and many, many thanks for that. Barvini Future says, I use CBD oil and CBD drinks. Well, I've noticed that maximum dose of 17 milligrams is advised. Is this 17 mil maximum dose per day correct? And also, which health body set this 70 milligram dose? Anyone know about that, Harry?
I can only talk about the UK Food Standards Agency. That used to be the guidance on maximum CBD dose per day. That has now been reduced to 10 milligrams per day based on animal safety studies and precautionary principle. And they also advise that vulnerable groups shouldn't consume any CBD products. And their definition of vulnerable groups include under 18s, pregnant and nursing women, older people, people with issues with liver function, etc., and also people who are taking other types of medication. So that's quite a lot of the population.
Thank you. The next one, this looks like a Joe one, I think. Another question from Barbini Future. Which format of CBD is most effective to consume, oil, paste, and vape? And perhaps as well, if Joe has anything on which is the most popular and which is the most marketed at the moment.
In the first part of the question, it does depend person to person. That we've found that for some people we've spoken to, oil might be the most effective. For others, it's gummies. For others, it might be other products that they take. In terms of the marketing, we find that still CBD oil is at the forefront of CBD interactions, but actually the other food products that are available, whether that be CBD gummies or CBD chocolate, that's the sort of thing that's gradually creeping up on CBD oil as the most taken type of CBD. But as I said earlier, there's over 100 different types of CBD product.
Noted, thank you. And I don't know if, so that's a very, the consumer experience view. I don't know if Amir or Harry have anything on the clinical view of which modalities of ingesting CBD should be most effective, in inverted commas, since I guess you can look at effectiveness in some different ways. Yeah, Amir?
I could just mention from sort of like a basic theoretical pharmacology perspective that when you orally consume something, a lot of that drug is then broken down immediately. And for CBD, what we call bioavailability, so the percentage of the thing that you take and how much ends up in your bloodstream. We don't know for certain for CBD, but we think it's probably between 5 to 10%. And that compares to inhaled that has about around 30-35% of bioavailability. But there's a difference between inhaled and oral in that if you take something orally, there's a slower release. So it takes a couple of hours for you to have sort of relevant levels of the compound in your blood, and it will stay in your system for longer. Whereas if you inhale something, you reach high plasma concentrations in your blood almost immediately, and that's lasts for just a few hours. So it tapers off quite quickly as compared to oral.
And I mean, that question about bioavailability is quite important, considering most consumer products are quite low dose anyway. And then if you reduce that by a factor of 10 or 20, then the potentially active available dose is even lower. And that, again, that brings into question how effective can those really small doses be, especially if people are consuming under the FSA guidelines of a maximum of 10 milligrams per day. We're talking minuscule amounts that potentially people are consuming.
Noted. Thank you very, very much. So next question. Can anyone answer, can CBD help ease withdrawals from THC?
I can take that one. So we don't have a lot of studies that have been controlled. We only have one in cannabis addiction. And that study mainly found that people who did receive CBD had a reduction in cannabis use and amounts of cannabis metabolites in their urine. There was a slight reduction in withdrawal scores in the CBD group, but that's when participants were taking 800 milligrams of CBD a day. So, I mean, to achieve that with consumer products, you need to be pretty minted.
It's another question. It's actually an aside to the CBD conversation, but I think it's quite a useful one, since there will be people listening in who want to know the answer to this, and I think at least one of our panelists will know the answer. But it's basically saying, well, that's on CBD. We're overlapping. We're talking about various aspects of medical cannabis. Can anyone quickly tell us what range of products there are by the NHS in the UK? How do you know that? What is available in terms of medical cannabis in the UK?
Well, yeah, in terms of CBD products, there's Epidiolex, and that is for to help children with some forms of rare forms of epilepsy. Sativex, now that's a mixed THC and CBD product, but it contains CBD, and that's used in muscle spasticity in MS. There's also Nabilone, which is a THC product, synthetic THC product, which is used, for example, for extreme nausea and chemotherapy. Now, they're the licensed cannabis-based products. We also have unlicensed cannabis-based products for medicinal use. And these are the range of oils, herbal materials from, for example, your Bedrocans, the Tilrays, the classic examples. So they haven't received market authorization. Currently, they don't receive widespread support within the medical community, hence we have a small number of prescriptions. But there's quite a lot of those products, but those products have to demonstrate certain standards with regards to safety, etc., marketing, distribution, and what we call GMP standards. These are standard pharmaceutical quality standards, but they don't necessarily have to show efficacy.
In fact, so I am promised I will ask rather the remaining 4 questions. I actually got a bit of a follow-up from that. This is kind of, I guess what you think should happen and what you think will happen policy-wise. So it seems there's a few options here for how this seems. All the grey areas seem like an unwanted situation where hopefully we will have more certainty one way or another. And off the top of my head, various options for the future could be keep it as a consumer-regulated corner shop wellness product. Another way could be go down, we decide it's harmful or dangerous or unwanted and go down the criminal route. Another route could be the deciding it's medicine and regulate it and prescribe it like a medicine. Does anyone have any prediction on what will happen, on any view on what should happen regarding essentially clearing up the regulatory uncertainty we have at the moment?
Yeah, so the current policy situation, it is not a product of careful deliberation and design. We've kind of muddled through to get to the situation where we are pretty much like medicinal cannabis policy. So the options that you mentioned, it's not going to be controlled under the Misuse of Drugs Act, but I do think perhaps there'll be a tiny gap of unregulated products. So the products that aren't approved as cosmetics or foodstuffs or licensed medicines, now there could be tighter action. I suspect that will be taken at a local level under consumer protection laws. In terms of your other options, well, we already have those options in place. So if a manufacturer wanted to gain market authorization for a CBD product for a specific indication, they can do that. That is hugely expensive. One of the reasons why we have so few products, although other types of products are in development and are being trialed. I think I have a bit of there's part of me which needs to be practical about this. that I think it's unlikely, and despite what Joe was saying about some manufacturers, I think it's unlikely because of the cozy situation that exists at the moment that many manufacturers and retailers will be demanding that their industry is regulated with regards to efficacy of products. I think consumers need the evidence and security and confidence that the products that they're taking are not just safe, but are also efficacious for the reasons that they're taking them. I think that's responsible retailing, responsible manufacturing, and as consumers, perhaps we should be demanding that as well.
I mean, I can just echo what Harry mentioned. There could sort of be collaborative efforts, sort of grants that are given to companies wishing to test the efficacy of their products. They could, reach out to, academics like ourselves to help them design the trials and make sure that they're run effectively and look at important outcomes as well. And on the medicinal side, I mean, from a scientific point of view, CBD, although we don't fully understand the mechanism of action it has pharmacologically, it's really an interesting compound that holds potential in psychiatry for schizophrenia and cannabis use disorder. So stay tuned.
Thank you. Very, very good answer. So now I think they're all kind of mostly 6 quick hisses, the remaining 6 questions we've got. So from Nathaniel Harrod, I've heard a number of people saying CBD will make you sleepy. What have studies shown around this?
Not much. There've been a few placebo-controlled studies, and CBD doesn't seem to have a significant impact on sleep.
Noted. Thank you very, very much. Another question from Laura Lanray Ajay. Any role that the consumer duty regulations play with responsibility of manufacturers, distributors, and retailers of CBD products? If they're not allowed to market or promote it as a medicine, how much information should they be providing consumers?
Well, I think we've already covered that. So at least in the United Kingdom, it's covered by a range of consumer-orientated legislation, so food standards as a novel food and the cosmetics legislation. That's a separate issue from uses of it. So that legislation gives comfort to consumers that the product is safe and it should contain what it has on the label and that it's manufactured in a high quality manner. But in terms of information around uses and effects, again, as we've been discussing throughout the webinar, they're not allowed to do that because then it would be classed as a medicinal product. And there's the barriers there for market authorization are a lot higher.
Make it. Thank you very much. Another question. So we've got, it was 3 now, 4 quick hitters. Might have to call it a day at some point if the questions keep on growing. Some highlighted that different approach to approving botanical medicines is needed, as botanical medicines do not lend themselves to any kind of pharmaceutical assessment we expect from pharma. Is there any discussion about this at the regulatory level, Harry?
So good question. That's not particularly relevant in relation to CBD, because for the CBD products that have been trialed that Amir is talking about, you can administer those in pure doses, in inverted commas, and you can measure the doses, etc. I think about trials and regulation of plant-based medicines. Now, that's obviously more relevant to medicinal cannabis products more generally. And that's something which is a hot debate at the moment here in the UK. And there's concerns, is it easy or is it difficult to conduct these trials? Is there an entourage effect, or is it the effects of THC? I would just say that it's a complex issue, but currently regulatory systems in the United Kingdom and many other countries aren't aligned to those types of medicines. Now, in other countries, other forms of evidence, often based on traditional uses, have been accepted. So in Israel, for example, the Netherlands, in Germany, for example, where there's a much longer history of the use of herbal medicines, if we can call it that, then there's less of a regulatory concern that we, or different types of regulatory concern that we have here in the United Kingdom, where we don't really have a mainstream use of traditional medicines, herbal medicines. And most of our regulatory bodies have been built around the RCT and the classic pharmaceuticals that were used to be prescribed from our doctor.
What if the CBD industry caters for the alternative medicine crowd and providing evidence would be seen as aligning with big pharma? And by the way, the majority of cannabis users in Poland who I talk to say CBD is some sort of bullshit, pardon the French. I guess the in-betweeners, pharma cannabis culture serves the industry. Anything to add to that, anyone?
I'd say from my perspective, we see this from some of the participants who actually don't have any faith in big pharmaceutical companies and will be drawn and aligned to the CBD companies who do try and market it in that way. So there are some companies that are taking advantage of those people's beliefs.
Yeah,
Harry?
I was just going to add, I know we've both joked about Matthew Letizia, and it's easy. I think it is a straw man, and I think many people who don't believe in conspiracy theories do have concerns about the pharmaceutical industry, and rightly so, from what we know about their tactics in the past, their questionable practices. So I don't think we should brush everybody with conspiracy theory brush.
Thank you very, very much. I think what I said definitely needed that very useful corrective. And many, many concerns there about the pharmaceutical industry. Okay, so thank you. I think this is the longest one we've ever done, but the really good questions kept on coming. So thank you very, very much to Joe, Harry, and Amir. Thank you very, very much for all the audience and the questions. Very, very, very good and informative episode of this, I think. Have a lovely one, everyone, and very, very much thanks for joining. And of course, for Harry, Joe, Amir, thanks very, very much for contributing. Have a good one. Have a good one, everyone.